One of the organizations that has been instrumental in preserving our wildlife is International Fund Animal Welfare. Today we have been graced by IFAW Global Vice President, Mr. Jamil Mandima. He shall be elaborating more on the importance of preserving our wildlife. Welcome to People and Earth. Welcome to People and Earth, Mr. Jamil Mandima. Hope you're well.
Thank you. Very well. Thank you for having me on this program.
It's a pleasure to have you on board.
Likewise.
Kindly give us a brief background of International Animal Welfare.
The International Fund for Animal Welfare is a global non-profit organization focused on people and animals coexisting. We are now close to celebrating 54 years of existence, and our work looks at rescuing individual animals, rehabilitating them, and releasing them to the wild. Our program portfolio covers 40 countries worldwide, and we work on combating wildlife crime, on landscape conservation, which is the spaces where many species exist, like Hwange National Park. We also work on community engagement because all we do is about how people can coexist with wildlife, with nature. We then also work as part of our program to influence global policy. So when decisions are made at conventions that are UN Rio conventions, we are trying to use the evidence base that we gain from the work on the ground to inform decisions by politicians and how we do economic development. Other programs we do besides land relate to marine conservation, where the marine mammals, the whales, the sharks, we also look at how we can conserve them to ensure the blue economy can persist and save as well. Then we also work on what we call disaster response and risk reduction. We see climate change all the time causing more recurrent droughts, more recurrent floods, a lot of earthquakes, and many other things. Our program as an organization is holistic, and in the process of doing that, we work with partners. So that's in a nutshell and very quick what the International Fund for Animal Welfare does.
So, Mr. Mandima, you have been a champion for conservation for a considerable period of time. May you briefly tell us about your career of the environmental sector and your role as the Vice President of IFAW?
So my first intersection with nature was really growing up in a rural setting in southern Zimbabwe, Masvingo. And during that time, I was doing the typical chores of herding cattle, swimming in the local rivers, going fishing, going hunting, collecting wild fruits. Fast forward, I was able to study biological sciences in my first degree, proceeded to do applied zoology for my master's, and then my doctoral studies also in the same field. I then came back and worked as a research scientist for the University of Zimbabwe in Kariba, on Lake Kariba, and Kariba is in a park. So that exposed me to coexisting with elephants, with lions, with everything. So I volunteered then as part of the Wildlife Society of Zimbabwe, now Wildlife Environment Zimbabwe, served for many years as chairman of the Kariba branch, then subsequently vice president of Wildlife Environment Zimbabwe, in charge of environmental education, which became a nationwide initiative where we had environmental education officers working with schools to train young kids to go on nature trails, to be exposed, to interact with wildlife. 9 years later, I then joined another organization that was starting a program in Zimbabwe for wildlife conservation, non-profit. And that was the beginning of my journey, really being paid for what I've always volunteered to do. And I worked for that organization for a good 10 years in the field. And as part of what IFAW does now, when you do good work in the field, it's important to influence the discourse of the people that champion what happens in the globe. So I moved to Washington, D.C., where I'm now domiciled. And essentially my job was to engage, being the front with the US government. That, as you may be aware, is obviously a pace setter on various issues that happen globally. I have since been with IFAW for the last 4 years, and serving as the Vice President for Global Programs essentially means all that we do at IFAW across the 40 countries with IFAW staff, with our partners, with governments is part of my leadership role. And I have to say, I probably have now become the least specialized but a jack of all trades, because I rely on the diversity of my team that literally straddles the entire world, from Latin America, Caribbean, into Europe, into China, into Australia and Southeast Asia. And that is a role that really exposes me to learning about how what Zimbabwe does matters for the globe, and how at the end of the day, wildlife conservation, people issues are a global issue.
Wow, that's impressive. That's impressive. How do people become IFAW ambassadors, and additionally, how do they get involved in your cause?
That's a great question. And to be honest, all people need to do is to learn about IFAW, to learn about the importance of protecting our natural heritage. We are in a position as Africans where we are most endowed across the whole globe with these natural resources. So any Zimbabwean, any individual that cares about nature, to have fresh, clean air, to have fresh water, to enjoy being in the wilderness, needs to speak about it. So we are available. Go to our website, find out what we do, offer to be a spokesperson. We try to get as many voices to speak for IFAW's mission, which is about bringing fresh thinking and bold action, because the challenges are huge and we can't do it alone. We rely on the collective involvement of people that become ambassadors, that send the message to essentially influence our behaviors, which is either how we interact with nature or how we consume, being wasteful.
Thank you for your answer. I always believe in teamwork makes the dream work, right? Mm-hmm. So it's amazing that you mentioned that you guys are collaborating and making sure that you do work together in order to make things work. So thank you for that. So we're going to take a short commercial break, and we'll be right back with Mr. Jamil Madiba. Welcome back. We're still here with Mr. Jamil, and he was telling us about how they work as a team. So Mr. Jamil, do you have local stakeholders that you're working with in attaining your goals?
That's a great point. And in fact, I have to say yes. Emphatically, the main stakeholder is the government of Zimbabwe. We work very closely with the Zimpax department, which you know is a semi-autonomous organization with the mandate to oversee the entirety of the wildlife resource in the country. Then secondly, a second key stakeholder is the local communities. If you look at the map of Zimbabwe, our protected areas are in the marginal areas, and that outside that are communities that subsist on land and natural resources. So they're a key stakeholder, because their decisions on how they interact with wildlife are key to be able to protect those habitats. Then thirdly, we work with other local NGOs. There are so many community-based organizations. You may be aware of the Campfire program, which is the Communal Areas Management Program for Indigenous Resources, which is meant to empower local communities to have rights on decisions on how to use natural resources. Those community-based organizations are key partners to IFAW. Then secondly, we also have many small NGOs that are local and Zimbabwean. We work with them. I can give examples like the Wild is Life, that have a nursery just next to the airport, where individuals, animals that are rescued when they are either orphaned because of poaching, or they are stuck in mud, or literally just lose their head. They get them to the nursery, they rehabilitate them, and then reintroduce them for soft release in a place we call on and lease from Forestry Commission to release it to the wild in Wange. Then we work with so many other partners. So it's really a collective action. And as far as IFAW is concerned, we cannot do it alone. And the sustainability of what we do is the partnerships. And the model I described for Zimbabwe obtains across the globe everywhere we work. When we talk of 40 countries, we actually have offices in 17 of those countries. In the rest of the countries, it's partnerships that are smart and strategic, and that's how you sustain these interventions.
What are some of the IFAW projects that you are working on in the pipeline?
So we made a formal arrangement with the government of Zimbabwe back in 2019, and we were directed to focus on investing the conservation partnership efforts in Wange National Park, which, as you know, is one of the largest national parks in Africa and in the world, actually. larger than many other countries in Europe. And the idea was to focus on investing in law enforcement, the rangers, the men and women that patrol and protect the wildlife resources from poaching. And in Hwange National Park, which is a whole country, we focus on training for these rangers. But a key thing that really we have prioritized is ranger welfare. Many a times you come across these men and women and they have tattered uniforms, their boots are torn, they lack rations, therefore they are not motivated, yet they are so passionate about what they do. So we have focused on upgrading the ranger accommodation in Hwange National Park. We were directed to focus on the southern part, which a few years back actually was a location for a tragedy where we lost close to 200 elephants due to cyanide poisoning. This is 10 years ago. Now, because of our partnership now, we have seen no poaching the last 2 years. Then the second element of our involvement project-wise is what we call game water management. Hwange National Park doesn't have natural water supply, so they have a network of close to 76 water pans that rely on water being pumped from the ground using solar energy. So over the years, they've never been able to be maintained, so they've gotten silted. So we are doing water pan scooping to enable them to hold more water when it rains, and then that can sustain the wildlife during the dry season. One of the iconic one we did is what is called Nyamandlovu Pan, which is a very popular tourist, where there's a whole platform where tourists can go and see the wildlife. We literally scooped it, and it now can contain water close to 5 Olympic stadia. That volume of water we know takes the wildlife through the dry season into the next rain season, and that's important. Then thirdly, we also work with Wildlife at a place called Pandamasui, which is a forest commission reserve where we are leasing and essentially getting all the orphaned elephants as part of soft release, and we get them to interact with natural wildlife, families of elephants, and on their own accord move to become wild. And that's an area which is very critical because individual animals are part of a species population. And if we neglect them, we gradually lose what actually makes a viable population. Then we also work with the communities in Cholocho, which is abutting Hwange National Park in the south. And the idea is what opportunities exist for local communities to benefit from value chains that are reliant on wildlife. It's possible to have campsites because wildlife, again, knows no borders. They go into communities. There is serious human-wildlife conflict. So our solutions to working with the communities to mitigate human-wildlife conflict. And one way of doing it is trying to proffer climate-smart agriculture. So you do your agriculture intensively using local kind of varieties that are drought-resistant, that are productive short season. And by doing that, you avoid extensification and even the propensity for people to do illegal offtake. So it's a combination of community engagement benefits. And last but not least, we also are talking to private sector partners where we are saying tourism is a big deal in Zimbabwe. How can you come and do your own feasibility studies to invest? And when you do that, we broker partnership with the government, with the local communities. That's kind of the combination of what we do. I said earlier on, there is a whole team of investigations and security teams. These are the people that do intelligence gathering on all the criminal networks that exist. So we support them. But that support is guided by Zim Parks. We never take the lead. So what IFAW does is Zim Parks and IFAW and all the network of partners I talked about earlier on. So that's what we have on the radar. If you want to think ahead, we believe elephants, in particular, given Zimbabwe is the second largest elephant population in the world, second to Botswana, need space to move. Now, and they can move across borders. They have no passports. So how do we create room to roam for elephants? We have started a very ambitious initiative called Room to Roam for Elephants to be able to connect within elephant population clusters in Southern Africa and East Africa, because we work across East and Southern Africa. And what that means is doing land use plans and zoning areas for agriculture and community areas, for grazing, for settlements, but also identify those healthy ecosystems and places where elephants can actually use. and saying, how do we secure them for elephants to utilize? If you do that, elephants try to avoid people, people try to avoid elephants. But because we often don't proactively set aside land, they end up intersecting and there's conflict. Lives are lost, people are injured, crops are damaged. So room to roam is our way of saying, let's try to think ahead as there's going to be water scarcity because of climate change. There's going to be encroachment and increased settlements because of what we do for development. That's the pipeline of projects, and IFAW, fortunately, thanks to the government of Zimbabwe, has been invited to maintain that conservation partnership and grow that portfolio.
Oh, wow. Wow, that is definitely some insightful information. You never really think about all these things. So let us take another commercial break and we'll be right back. Welcome back.
Pleasure.
So tell us, what is your take on poaching? How is it affecting the ecosystem?
So poaching is a big problem, largely because it is driven by international, very sophisticated syndicates that really want to rely on derivatives of wildlife products, ivory, rhino horn, lion bones, for their own just enjoyment. It's not like people that need money. So what has been happening is we've seen a lot of elephants being poached, a lot of rhinos disappearing, and our lions, and the list goes on, because now wildlife trafficking and illegal trade is the fourth largest illicit trade chain, which is not acceptable. Now, what are we doing? We are looking at making sure that the men and women that serve as rangers are well equipped. I talked about the ranger welfare. We have registered as part of the International Ranger Federation ourselves, which allows us to be part of the global network for lesson learning, for cross-site lesson learning, to ensure that these rangers are always up to speed with the latest technology. We are training rangers to use the smart technology, which allows them to deploy strategically. Hwange is a huge place, but we identify hotspots to be able to deploy effectively. We are training what we call rapid response units that are highly skilled, almost like, if you think of the most SWAT teams in the US Army or any other armies ever, that's for the Rangers. But important is about communities that are proud of their natural resources. They can be complicit to crime, or they can actually be whistleblowers. So we are talking and making sure that the benefits they could derive from sustainable agriculture, from engaging with natural resources and benefiting, allows them to be willing participants to tell us, we suspect these people moving around. So having what we call community enforcement networks that are whistleblowers helps to curb poaching. At the end of the day, in the 2010 to 2014 era, we lost a lot of iconic wildlife due to poaching. That has gone down because we have invested as an organization, and also other like-minded organizations, in supporting law enforcement. And that, again, is by building the capacity and investing through the mandated organizations. It's not about IFAW coming to have 100 rangers in Hwange. It's about the rangers that belong to the government being well equipped to do that. And then lastly, it's about offering alternatives. Why do people poach? Some will tell you we need meat. I think justifiably so, but those actually, it's bushmeat. That's not the high value poaching of ivory, but it still matters. So if you are able to diversify the rural economy, the food production systems, there is no need for people to do that. And that's what we do, which is why community engagement and ownership is important.
Okay, wow. That is, something that's not good, when these people are doing it for, whatever reasons they are doing it at. What can be done to curb the poaching of wildlife, though?
So ranger welfare is key, providing alternatives is key, but more importantly, it's about sensitizing the market end of things. So as an organization, we have a very strong social behavior change team that is focused on those consumer countries that often buy the poached products unknowingly. We remember stories being told about how some buyers of ivory just assumed that elephants' tusks are like teeth. They drop and they grow new ones. But once we started showing them some of the gruesome photos of a hacked elephant, they said, no, we can't buy this product. So it's a combination of ignorance and then also just having a global movement at policy level. So you have followed what we call the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, CITES. They meet, every 3 years, where all the parties, including Zimbabwe, and those that have got this, wildlife resource, agree on mechanisms to control the trade of endangered species. And all the species we have, like the elephants, the rhinos, the lions, they are endangered, and many others, wild dog. So all those mechanisms, once there's no market, why poach? So it's about dealing with the entire chain. It's the poaching on the ground with rangers, and then the trafficking. So we run what we call canine units, dog units, that are able to sniff ivory, to sniff rhino horn. So if you are traveling by an airport or by Bight Bridge, the dogs will come and sniff the container, and they'll sit there because they see something is funny here. So issues like pangolin scales, live pangolins, live pets, the dogs are specially trained to be able to do that. So we deal with the trafficking. We are training other agencies besides just the wildlife authorities, customs officials, immigration officials, airport authorities that are not familiar with how to identify what has been stolen. So our teams do conscientizing on that. Then last but not least, we also have worked with a whole network of online companies, Facebook, Google, eBay, name it, and technology companies to use artificial intelligence and what to look out for, and then be able to bust what is being sold using all kinds of disguised names when it can be ivory or rhino horn. So the whole solution to stop poaching is not just addressing the law enforcement, but what's driving it, why are people poaching, is because there's a market. So we want to clog all that, and that's why we deal with the entire chain.
Okay. Wow. Well, World Wildlife Day is going to be celebrated under the theme Partnership of Wildlife Conservation. What is your viewpoint on that?
That's on point, because I talked earlier on about who do we work with. I think there's a saying that, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others. And the journey is long. The challenges are huge. What does it need? Fresh thinking and bold action. That's our mantra is IFAW, for animals and people to coexist and thrive together. So partnerships in that theme is fitting. And the partnership don't start from local, grassroots, all the way to the global arena. So our program, as I talked earlier, is about engaging at all those levels and just being able to get the entire globe rallying behind World Wildlife Day and saying partnership is. And then we know, as part of the SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, there is a goal for partnerships, sustainable partnerships, because if Zimbabwe, just as an example, does good to protect the wildlife, which we know will cross over into another country, all that investment is lost. So the partnership at regional level, at continental level, at global level is key. And that theme, I think, is a reminder to say, don't just think if you sit in London, the responsibility for wildlife is for people in the parks, because your consumption habits, what you think, how you invest, how you spread the word matters. So you are a partner no matter where you are.
So thank you for all that insightful information. It was a pleasure having you on board, and I'm sure people have definitely learnt a lot from your information.
It was my pleasure, and I hope people take the message home. We all have a role to play, a responsibility. So thank you for the chance to communicate this, and anytime look us up on IFAW.org and dig into what we do. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Join us again next week for another episode on People and Earth. Same place, same time. Ciao, ciao.